Welcome back. This afternoon, I'm delighted to introduce Alex Epstein, who's going to speak on his new concept and project, the Human Flourishing Project. Alex is, as I assume most of you know, the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and the founder of the Center for Industrial Progress. Named the most original thinker of 2014, the year his book came out, by political commentator John McLaughlin, Epstein advocates a philosophy that is anti-pollution but pro-development and challenges many popular ideas about energy, industry, and the environment. His latest venture, the Human Flourishing Project, will be launched, has been launched actually. He started the podcast 2 weeks ago, and you'll be hearing more about that today. Big hand for Alex Epstein on the Human Flourishing Project.
Thanks. When I was about 10 years old, I became interested in the issue of nutrition, which I think is something that most of us become interested in at one point or another. And I wasn't sort of a naturally really slim kid, and maybe around 10 I start to become self-conscious. So I start to wonder, okay, what can I eat to avoid becoming chubby? And at that point in my life, and probably for the last time, knowledge of this kind of thing seemed very simple, because I just looked at what I had heard, and what I heard is, well, you don't want to be fat, so just don't eat fat. And that seemed straightforward to me. And so I started, when I would go out and be traveling around the Washington, D.C. area, I would just buy things that were low fat, and I would eat a lot of gummy bears and candy corn. And I remember my dad one day said, Alex, that's not good for you. And I said, well, what do you mean? It's low fat. I'm supposed to avoid fat. And he said, but it's just empty calories. And then I said, oh, but there's another concept now. So it's supposed to be low fat, but I can't have empty calories. And let's say I'm 38 now, so 28 years since, and it's been quite a difficult subject to figure out. And it's a really important subject. And it's really important to the concept that this conference is about and that my work is about, which is the concept of human flourishing, which I take as meaning human beings existing at their highest possible state. Just like to flourish for a flower is to exist at its highest possible state, to flourish for a human means to exist at our highest possible state. And there's a lot of complexity to that, but definitely it means that we want to succeed in a material way and a mental way, and those are integrated. And so clearly to succeed in a material way, something like nutrition is very important. And yet, just as it was when I was 10 years old, it's an incredibly frustrating subject. And it's frustrating because it's incredibly difficult to get real knowledge about it, knowledge that we can rely on, knowledge that we can confidently act on. And so I, like many of you, have tried all sorts of different ways of eating over the years. And while I think at the moment I have a pretty good system, this is not a talk where I say, well, I used to have this problem. This is very standard in marketing. Like, I used to have this problem and you have this problem and I found the solution, so buy my solution. I'm actually trying to sell you on the problem. And the problem is that in so many areas, human beings lack reliable access to the knowledge we need to flourish. And this is the problem in the world that most bothers me and fascinates me. And when I think of lots and lots of different areas of human flourishing, this problem is very similar. So for example, the issue of psychology. It wasn't something I was super interested in when I was young, but in my mid-20s, I started experiencing fairly significant anxiety, and I didn't really know where it was coming from, and I wanted to understand it, and it was very difficult, because I'd read different things, and just like in nutrition, there are all sorts of conflicting claims. And then you might say, okay, consult an expert, consult a therapist, but okay, all the different therapists have conflicting claims, so then I'm gonna go to an expert, and what if I pick the wrong expert? This is my life at stake. It's not like, I'm picking maybe not the best baseball glove, not that that would be a good thing if I was really into baseball, but this is something that's crucial to my life, where making the right decision versus the wrong decision can affect the quality of my life and the length of my life for years and years and years. So this is a problem that really bothers me, and it bothers me that it doesn't bother everyone else enough. Because as a world, think about it, I mean, what we're doing is we all recognize that we need, whether we have the vocabulary of flourish or not, we all recognize that we need a certain kind of knowledge to flourish, and people spend lots of time and lots of money trying to get better knowledge. And yet, how do we usually do it? The way we usually do it is we're just looking for new claims to knowledge. So we're kind of hoping, okay, I'm going to watch this TED Talk, and this is finally going to be right. Or I'm going to read this blog post, or I'm going to read this new book. There's so much focus on novelty, and yet, and on some level, we know that's not going to work. But to our credit, as what I call students of life, we're trying to find new life-enhancing knowledge. And this is going to be relevant because often when people talk about philosophy, they act like, oh, this is something that's really hard to get people into. And I actually think, in many ways, people are thinking about philosophy all the time, whether they know it or not. And philosophy deals a lot with access to knowledge, and I think philosophy is crucial to this problem. Now, the way that I feel like I started making progress on this problem was that I encountered a subject where I decided that I would spend the time and effort to become expert on, and this subject was energy. So about 11 years ago now, I was kind of thought of myself as an applied philosopher, just applying philosophy to a lot of different fields, which I think you can create a lot of value doing. But there was no specific subject that I felt like I want to become an expert in this, until I encountered the field of energy, and particularly energy policy, which deals with what policies should governments, but also corporations and individuals make with regard to the production and use of energy, of man-made power. And the reason I was so intrigued by this was that until I started studying energy a little bit, I had never gotten that this is the fundamental industry. This is the industry that powers every other industry, which means that if we make good choices in energy, those are going to be very leveraged. They're like, if you can make energy more abundant and affordable and reliable, then everything else gets more abundant, affordable, and reliable. And if you can make energy, if we make energy more expensive, more scarce, less reliable, then everything gets worse. So it appealed to me as this is a very leveraged subject. And this is one that I thought, well, as a philosopher, particularly as somebody who knows a lot of objectivist philosophy, I feel like I could make a difference in this field. And philosophy in this field, like others, is enormously important. And I describe it as necessary, but not sufficient. So the way I think of philosophy, which is different than some people, I think of philosophy as fundamental to knowledge and flourishing, but not comprehensive about knowledge and flourishing. So it's a fundamental subject, but it's not a comprehensive subject. So what philosophy at its best does is it tells you things that you need fundamentally to live, particularly what fundamentally types of ends or goals you should pick in life, and then what fundamental types of means or actions you need to get there. But the fundamental thing philosophy, and particularly objectivist philosophy, is focused on is means of getting knowledge. It gives you certain means of getting knowledge that will be accurate and that will actually promote your life. But in terms of all the specifics they need to promote your life, philosophy necessarily can't give you all of those specifics. So in the field of energy, I had an enormous advantage among just about anyone in the field because I knew from philosophy, say, that we need a standard of good or a standard of value when we're making policy choices, and that ultimately that should be pro-human or pro-human flourishing. And in the field, people weren't thinking of that at all. They either had no idea of any standard, or they would pick the worst possible standard, which is the green standard, which is to say we should make energy choices and industrial choices by the standard of what impacts nature the least, which is, I realized pretty quickly, that's a deeply anti-human standard. So philosophy helps a lot, but there were all sorts of specific questions in energy that just by even knowing a ton of philosophy, I couldn't answer. And energy as a whole involve what I would describe as crucial, complex, and confusing questions, and particularly around the use of fossil fuels, because fossil fuels provide 80+% of the energy that we use to flourish, and 3 billion people have basically no energy at all, so we still need a lot more energy, and yet at the same time, there are serious concerns about, well, if we continue to use this energy, the CO2 byproduct from this energy above all is going to make our planet uninhabitable, or some significant degree of that. And so that's a very scary set of alternatives. If you don't have the right knowledge in one direction, then you're going to deprive people of this fundamental value. And then in the other direction, you can potentially deprive us of a livable environment. And so this was a situation where I needed to figure out certain knowledge about human flourishing and energy, and I needed to do a lot of work to do it. So this is the problem as I see it that I experienced in energy and in everything else. And the wrong solution, which I realized by that time in energy definitely wouldn't work, which I mentioned in nutrition, is just seek out new claims. It's a claims-focused approach to knowledge. And there's something very wrong with that. And I think what philosophy can point us toward, but it's necessary but not sufficient toward, is that when we're looking for better knowledge, we can't primarily look for new claims. We need better systems. We need better systems for using knowledge. And I think there are three key areas where we need better systems, where we need different kinds of methods that can bring us in the right direction. And I would put those in the category of we need better systems to acquire knowledge. So acquire knowledge, figure out what's actually going to advance human flourishing. And within that, we need good methods for seeking it out, for validating it, and then for integrating it together. So we need knowledge of acquisition. And then we need knowledge of application. Once we have a context of knowledge about something, how do we actually use it and benefit ourselves? And then explanation. Once we reach the truth about something, or once an expert reaches the truth, how do they explain it to somebody so that it's actually persuasive and clear? And so in energy, I needed to do all of these. And I think of my first Human Flourishing Project. There's the Human Flourishing Project as a whole, but I think of the first one as really the Center for Industrial Progress, which I've spent the last, 7 years on. And really the mission of this was to help government, and still is, to help governments, companies, and individuals identify and promote pro-human industrial policies. And it's had quite a bit of success at this. I actually think now what I've now learned with Human Flourishing Project can have a lot more, but it's definitely something where we've seen in many, many cases, we've helped a lot of people get a lot clearer about industrial policy issues, particularly energy issues. And then also we've been able to explain them in a way that has influenced a lot of people. So for example, just take one of a lot of examples that I see. In California, there are these lawsuits, these climate lawsuits against major companies. And if you look at, say, the judge's verdict shutting some of these lawsuits down, you look at the company's arguments, those are very closely related to the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And it's very unlikely that they would have made those same arguments without that. And I think the key to it is just that we've taken a systematic approach. Instead of just kind of jumping in and looking for let's just find new stuff, let's focus on our systems, let's focus on our processes, and that has allowed us a lot of success at acquiring, applying, and explaining knowledge. So, I mentioned at the outset, I've been my whole life interested in lots of issues of human flourishing. It's almost accidental that I decided to be into energy. I had no interest in energy before 11 years ago. And still, as much as I like energy, for me, it's not a lifelong passion as in just this specific issue I want to be involved in. I'm really most interested in knowledge systems. How do we develop systems that enable us to get the knowledge that we really want and need? And so then there's a question of, okay, with what I've figured out with energy, how can this be applied more widely? And one insight that I had with the energy issue was that helping people with energy and industrial policy, I thought, these are issues people really care about. Just general ambitious citizens care about these issues. They spend time and money thinking about them. And then certainly the companies and other allies that I think are doing the right thing, they certainly spend a lot of resources trying to explain these. So if I can actually offer people better knowledge systems, then they should be willing to pay for them. And this was one of the big ideas I had with Center for Industrial Progress. Now I have to make those systems really usable and really user-friendly, and I need to explain their value well. So there's a whole bunch of challenges. But fundamentally, if I can actually figure out a way in energy or beyond to get you a much better chance of getting knowledge, and then a much better chance of using it well, or a much better chance of explaining to somebody else, you should be willing to pay me a lot of money for that, because it's super, super valuable. And I don't mean that you give it to me as a donor, where you say, well, Alex, I like what you're saying, I would like other people to have it. And that's a legitimate model. But I'm talking about, no, people should be paying for it if you can actually offer the value. And so when I think of Human Flourishing Project, I think of, okay, what we really want to do is we want to create reliable access to knowledge about human flourishing, and the fundamental is we need to develop and apply new knowledge systems to get there. When I think of how to pursue this, my instinct, based on my experience and just the way I think about it, is there must be huge opportunity in the world to develop and apply better knowledge systems where we can help a lot of people out and where they'll pay for it. And this is definitely what I found in energy, and it's already just having this, talking to people about this for a couple months, it's just amazing to see. Not surprising, but amazing to see, wow, there are lots of areas in the world where people do want better and human flourishing-based knowledge systems. So I just thought I'd share with you some projects that are underway. And these are all early stage, but everything I'm going to talk about, there are real people with real resources expressing real interest in these things. I just want to reinforce, this is something that if we can use philosophy in a truly empowering way, then people will eagerly want it. And they'll use it, and we'll get the values that we want as a society. Not just a free society, but a society that produces real knowledge, which is even more fundamental in a certain sense. So one general opportunity I've seen is that there are other ventures like mine at Center for Industrial Progress who also want to advance human flourishing. They want to acquire, apply, and explain life-enhancing knowledge themselves. So some of these are organizations in the nonprofit world, but also in the for-profit world, a really good business, think about what it does. It figures out, it's really gaining new knowledge about a way to advance human flourishing. It's very similar to just gaining general kind of scientific principled knowledge. So there are businesses too who are really interested in how can we really empower people in some area of life? And then how do we explain to them that this is really good? So for example, one project I've started getting involved in is an incubator for pro-freedom public intellectuals. People saying, yeah, I would really like it if people who are pro-freedom were better at acquiring and applying and explaining knowledge, where they could really win people over, and where they could win people over, and they could somehow more effectively outcompete the people with statist ideas. Another one I've gotten involved in is an incubator for pro-flourishing startups. So there's a certain class of startups, and I think this will broaden, who really say, we want human flourishing to be part of our mission. And it's not something higher than profit. It's directly related to how we profit. And we want help. We could use better systems here as well. Another category, and this is business more broadly, when I've started talking about human flourishing and knowledge systems for human flourishing, companies saying, hey, I want human flourishing to be more of a part of my company. I can see how much it would help my company if we were really thinking in terms of human flourishing, and that was really our explicit goal, and that was part of our culture, that's how we treated people, and that's how we communicated to the world. And I think that the best companies in the world, like Apple and Amazon, in many ways do this at a level we can learn a lot from, even if they don't have human flourishing as an explicit concept. So that's one category, is people who just have overall human flourishing ventures. Now, I think that within these categories of acquire, apply, and explain, they're really, really glaring once you start thinking about it, needs of people who would really want help with this. So let's take knowledge acquisition systems. If we can really, and part I say we, because I'm going to explain in a minute, trying to develop a community. So I can do a lot of innovation here, but what we really need is a community that cares about these systems and is innovating. So who could profit from this? Well, one thing I've started early work on, but has gotten some interest, is for investors who want to learn about what's the real state of technological progress. In energy, I've seen investors have horrible knowledge most of the time. When I talk to investors about the future of energy, they have so much difficulty separating knowledge from non-knowledge, in part because we have a whole faulty knowledge system where, as knowledge consumers, we don't have good systems for producing things, but also as knowledge producers, we don't have good systems. And so it's incredibly difficult to separate out what's knowledge and what's non-knowledge. So I tell people, well, imagine if we could help you have certain systems to process things, and also we could find the best knowledge producers and help them explain things better, then you could potentially make millions or even billions of dollars. Like, this is actually really good for people. So there's another one, a big category, and this is the one I've seen the most opportunity in so far, is with explanation systems. And better explanation systems means if you have the right idea, you should be able to be more persuasive. And in energy, a lot of what my work has been figuring out, okay, my allies who are right, they're having so much difficulty persuading people that they're right. Are there systems we can develop in terms of superior explanation that you can actually have a much higher chance of, if you're right, convince people that you're right? And tomorrow I'm going to be talking about keys to communicating with clarity and impact, and I'll talk to you about some of the things I use there. But for instance, one is framing. There's a certain principle I use that if you can frame any kind of communication or discussion from the outset in the right way, you make people 10 times more likely to get to the truth. Where if you just jump into facts or arguments without the framing, then you have really no competitive advantage. Another one that I've seen is in the startup world, people say, hey, I love what you're doing with explanation systems, with framing. This could help with better investor presentations. So we have inefficiency right now where there's certain startups with really, really good ideas, and they just don't really know how to make the most persuasive argument. But if we have really clear systems for explaining things, maybe we can create a system where the best startups are more likely to win out, and that's going to be better for everybody. Another one that I've become quite involved with is with free market organizations, helping them create more persuasive messaging. You can imagine that all the energy in the free market world, all the money, when people are given the idea, hey, wait, maybe there's a way that's way more effective in winning people over, a lot of people say, yeah, like, I want to try that. I get a lot of interest. I spoke about some of these concepts a few weeks ago, and some major free market people came up and said, yeah, we want this. So I just want to impress upon everyone, better knowledge systems isn't something that we need to force on the world. Like, applied philosophy isn't something we need to force on the world. If we can explain to people how it's really going to help with their lives as they're experiencing their lives, so their problems as they're experiencing them, their desires as they're experiencing them, then people will want better ways of doing things. So we just have to develop them and then explain them really clearly. Now, the final one, which this is a lot of opportunity, and unfortunately I can't talk about what I'm working on here, but I think there's a lot of opportunity, just generally speaking, is application systems. Because the ability to apply knowledge is just fundamental to success everywhere, because it involves making better and better decisions. And people pay in all sorts of ways to make better decisions. So if you just think for yourself, if I could use philosophy in a way that would help me make better decisions, would that be valuable to me? But also, if I could explain to other people how, in their day-to-day decisions, that everyone is frustrated with the results of their decisions, almost everyone is, if I could show them, wow, your decisions are going to be a lot better, that's going to be really motivating to them. So in terms of, there's kind of these are specific, what I call human flourishing projects. And a lot of the Human Flourishing Project is finding different kinds of ventures to consult with, to speak with, ultimately maybe to partner with, where we can, by developing these superior knowledge systems and by applying them, we can help them. So this is a good chance to bring to your attention, there are cards that I think were handed out, but if anyone is watching this later, you can just email this address. If you can think of any organizations that would really be interested in this stuff, just write them down on the card or email me and write them down, and just put me in contact with them. I'll talk with them, and that, something really interesting could come out of that, or if you have one, then talk to me about that. So that could be really useful. Now, so that's the broad category of these are what I call human flourishing ventures. And some of this hopefully will spark some ideas in the audience, particularly among the young intellectuals and entrepreneurs, thinking of ways that you could use, think of developing better knowledge systems and helping people. It may apply to some of you who this could actually help your business. But whether or not this can help you, there is a broader opportunity that I think we all can get involved in. And this is that we can create a broader community of what I call students of life, and who are really obsessed with this issue of we need better systems so that we can get reliable knowledge. And this is where the current public Human Flourishing Project, which right now is a show, or we sometimes call it a podcast, even though it's broader than that. And that is, I've now published 3 episodes of it, so it just got started, and it's early, and I'm sure it'll improve in lots of ways. But the overriding goal and passion of it is to rally people around this idea of we want real knowledge and we're not getting it. We want real knowledge about human flourishing, and that we believe that we need better systems to get it. And what I'm trying to build is enthusiasm of people who are interested in this problem, because I need lots and lots of help in developing these ideas. I think I have a lot of innovation in me, certainly, and I've done a lot so far, but this is the kind of thing, if we're gonna have really good systems for getting knowledge, for explaining knowledge, for applying it, I wanna mine the world as much as possible. I wanna mine what people already know, but I also want to encourage people to be thinking about this. So I think of this show as, this is like a hub for everyone who's interested in human flourishing, for everyone who's interested in better knowledge systems. Just make sure I didn't miss something. And yeah, so it's very new, but already we're seeing, yes, people are really interested in these issues. And the hope is that if we, just like with a company, if we can show them these ideas, these systems will really improve your life. So with a program, like this should be something, if I can get it as good as it needs to be, this is something where it comes out every Friday, where every Friday you should be excited about it because you think, wow, this week my life is gonna be better. It's every Friday deliberately, like I'm gonna approach my weekend, I'm gonna have more altitude on the world, I'm gonna really get to think about how to make my life better. And ultimately, if the show succeeds enough, and part of that is finding the right business model. Right now I'm focused on just making it really good and refining that, but once it gets the right business model, once we can build it, then we can do amazing things. Like we can bring on the top experts in, say, nutrition, and instead of just doing softball interviews where you just interview somebody and they just give their answers and you don't really know if they're right or not, but they're here so it sounds like they're right, we can raise the standards of interviewing using better knowledge systems. What we can do is we can ask really rigorous questions. So a fantasy of mine, which will come true in the not too distant future, is in these different fields, like, let's say nutrition, I want to ask, let's say in the top 4 schools, I want to ask each person the toughest questions I can, including getting them to address the best arguments of the other school, which reading the literature almost never happens. People almost always straw man each other, and it's just very hard to know what's what. So I think that there is an interest here. I certainly would want it myself. That's my primary motivation. But I think other people have this feeling that, yeah, we're not getting real knowledge. And this is what else should we be focused on? You think about, we've got 7.5 billion people in the world. We need knowledge to flourish. We have so much opportunity in the world in the form of capabilities and technology. And yet so much of the world isn't flourishing, and I think the core reason is because we don't really know how. And it's not even that the knowledge isn't out there. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge that's not out there, but a huge amount of it is just that the knowledge exists somewhere, and we don't have the right systems in place to get it. Because as consumers, we don't really know how to be discerning, and then as producers, we don't really know how to explain persuasively. And so there's this gap between, there's this separation between the best knowledge producers and then us as knowledge consumers and students of life. And that gap should be viewed as a crisis in our society. We shouldn't just be talking about fake news. We should be talking about fake knowledge. That's the really fundamental problem in the world, is fake knowledge. And if we can get excited about this ourselves and share this with other people ourselves, then I think what we'll see is that the power of philosophy, which all of us in this room love, and particularly the power of objectivist philosophy, we'll start to see that be applied in a way that we've never seen before, because philosophy will be serving its really core purpose. So that's the Human Flourishing Project. I hope you're excited about it. At the very least, I hope you sign up on the website or put your email there on that sheet, or email me, alex@alexepstein.com. We'll get you on the list. So this is just the beginning, but it's exciting. To me, I hope that you're excited, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your talk, Alex.
Oh, I got two sources. Thank you. You're immortalized as the savior.
So this is fantastic. You have your own business, so of course you can choose your own clients. Some of them will likely come to you with a very different ethical framework, and they'll think, well, to flourish, I need to be good. And to be good, I need to give money away. Mm-hmm. And ironically, I was listening to your podcast, and right after that, I was listening to Sam Harris's interview with William McCaskill. He's this other applied philosopher, but he's doing the effective altruism movement. Uh-huh. So I'm wondering, obviously, someone like William McCaskill is not going to come and ask you for advice as to how to get knowledge, but maybe somebody with his ethical framework would. Do you have plans at any point to make the ethical backbone more explicit?
Yeah, definitely. So let me address this in the broad sense of how I think of the relationship between human flourishing and egoism, which will then influence my project, but also my activism. I think human flourishing is an incredibly useful concept because it captures the nature of life in a way that's rare. It captures that life is an integrated phenomenon of material and mental, and that we want both of those elements to be in harmony in an enduring way and in a wide-ranging way. So it's a very nice concept for capturing the way that we want life to be. And so I think it's a really good starting concept. It's a really good starting point, and then the question is, okay, what actually advances human flourishing? And then that's where you start to study, okay, well, what actually is flourishing and what isn't flourishing? And then one fundamental thing that you discover, which in terms of objectivist philosophy is, people think of this as simple, but it's really the fundamental, is the idea that reason is man's basic means of survival and also achieving happiness. And once people get the idea that reason is our basic means of survival, it calls into question the whole sacrificial idea of ethics. It certainly did for me, and it does for a lot of people, and I think it will for a lot more people, because once you get the idea that we can exist as non-predators, right? We can exist as creators and live in a completely mutually beneficial, or at least not oppositional way with other people, why do we need to suffer? Why do we need to sacrifice? We just don't. It takes that need away. But the way I like to start with it is to start off with, okay, human flourishing. I want to get the people in the room who clearly care about that, and there are some people who don't, and I want them out of the room, but I want them to explain that they're really out of the room, because some people claim that they do care about it, but don't. I want that to be the starting conversation, then want to really examine, okay, what principles and policies are going to lead to that? And then a lot of that means studying, okay, what's the nature of human beings and human flourishing? And I think once you start there, then people see, independent egoism, that is ultimately the only way that makes any kind of sense for individuals to live. So that's how I think of it. And so this will be seen online. I have no problem making that true. That's just true. But I think it's always, with controversial ideas, I guess I'll talk about this more tomorrow, it's always just a matter of what context do people need. I don't think of an idea as controversial or non-controversial. I just think of it as, do they have the context to understand it? And how can I lay that context as well as possible? So I'm never afraid, I never think of it like, I'm going to use this term human flourishing so that I don't use the term selfishness. It's more like, no, to understand even what selfishness properly means, I find human flourishing to be a good starting point. But if somebody asks you, are you selfish? I'd be like, of course, but just let me explain what that means.
Rock on, thanks.
Alex, unless you've changed, you have made several times in my listening to various presentations of yours, you've made it a point of pointing out that you what am I trying to say? Meditate.
Yes.
Twice daily, 20 minutes each.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that a person with your background, particularly love for objectivism and its principles, that this is not voodoo, that that you must gain terrific benefit from it.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could address a little bit more in depth about this decision
sure.
that you've made to do this
Sure.
activity.
Sure. So I want to do one of the motivations for finally getting the podcast out, because it took a year and a half, and I'm sure I announced it was coming out in 2 days, and then it took a year and a half, was that I started training my team at Center for Industrial Progress in different ideas. And then my assistant told me, like, I really want to know about meditation. I really want to know about meditation. I decided I would do a session, and I'm going to do a podcast about this on the broader issue of rejuvenation, because I think that that's the broader issue. Meditation is just a form of rejuvenation. That means a re-energizing of oneself, the body, and the mind. And the nature of life is we create and we rejuvenate. Those are two fundamental components of a process of human flourishing. So I think of meditation as this is just one potential way that human beings can rejuvenate. It's not its own little commandment, thou shalt meditate, or even meditate. I say meditation is necessary for human flourishing. I don't know. There may be better stuff. And if I found it, I would do it instead of meditating, because there's no prescription about it. But when I think about rejuvenation, meditation, the kind that I do, at least what's called transcendental meditation, it checks a lot of boxes. So if you think about what do you want from good rejuvenation, and this is a good question to ask in any area of life where we're trying to figure out how to flourish. What are the standards by which we can judge a good X, like a good rejuvenation ritual or a good career? And so in rejuvenation, off the top of my head, it would be, okay, I want to feel altitude afterwards, so I want to have a higher level perspective. I want to have mental energy. I want to have physical energy. I don't want it to take too long. If possible, I'd like it to be relieving of stress, certainly not creating of stress. I'd like it to clear my mind. So I think of certain things, and then if I look at, okay, what are all the things in my entire life that I've tried that can do this? There are a couple that I really like. Like I like the ocean a lot, to live next to the ocean now, which I recommend if you can do it. And there's that. There's this thing called the One Wheel, this electric skateboard, which is unbelievable. It's probably my favorite single, like the most reliably enjoyable activity I've ever found in my life. I just do it all the time, onewheel.com. Unfortunately, I don't get paid for the endorsement. But so there's just these things. And then I find that with meditation, the thing that's amazing about it is it's just 20 minutes, and it's like money in the bank, that if I just sit there for 20 minutes and do that little thing in my head, then I'm going to come out the other end much more rejuvenated. So for example, I meditated an hour ago before this talk, maybe even a little less. And the way, if you want to know about the mechanics of it, they recommend going to a teacher, but essentially all you're doing is you're just repeating a meaningless sound in your head over and over and over. And basically what that does is that relaxes the mind in a certain way. And the way one approaches it is, I don't want to get into all the details, but it's just, the key is just to be completely to have no pressure on it. It's just like, if it occurs to me, I'm gonna think about this sound, then if I go think about something else, great, but then I'm gonna go back to the sound. I'm gonna go back to the sound, I'm gonna go back to the sound, and it just has this great thing. And I don't fully understand the mechanics of it, but I found no voodoo effects to it and many beneficial effects. So it's worth a try. There's a good video by a guy named Brendan Burchard, who's an interesting kind of self-help guy who's pretty smart. And he has, if you look up Brendan Burchard meditation, he teaches something very close to this, and it's free online. Otherwise, you pay $1,000 and take the course, which I did, and happily. But you can take it on YouTube. It's pretty good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you give an example of a knowledge system that you developed for one of the organizations you mentioned?
Well, it's so sure. I mean, it's with explanation, let's say. I mean, with explanation, it's primarily developed for us and clients in energy, and it applies to other things. But I would say, for instance, one kind of explanation system I've developed is what I call a constructive conversation system. So that would be, how do you have a constructive conversation with somebody who expects to disagree with you? And then there are just different steps to that, but the key step I mentioned before is framing, which means that in one form or another, you want to get both people to agree that they're going to approach the issue using a common framework. So for example, if just in life, often a cost benefit is often misused, but it has a lot of valid uses. If you just, with a certain decision where you're really looking at trade-offs, if you just say, hey, would you agree that when making this decision, we have to look at both the pros and cons of this? We can't just say, look at the pros of solar and the cons of fossil fuels. That's the kind of process that it seems, it's very simple, But that will change the whole interaction, because if you can get somebody to agree to a common framework, then that'll change the way that they process information. So that would be an example of an explanation system is constructive conversation system, and then framing within that.
Second question.
Yeah.
Are there any negatives to solar panels, not like subsidized by the government per se or anything, but if a company is selling solar panels on people's houses, is this bad in any way?
Well, I'm just trying to give the model of the thinking, but sure, you would just, depending on the specific variety, it would be, say, well, maybe this is more expensive for you, or maybe, it depends on the particular type, but the big issues would be cost, reliability, and then there's the whole moral issue of taking other people's money, which is a big part of it right now. But just schematically, with anything almost, unless the decision is just completely obvious, there's going to be some form of trade-off. But the key is just to get them to be willing to look for it, because when people have that attitude of, oh, there's this decision that's just pure benefit and obvious, usually what happens is they have a bias that's coming into that that's making them think, oh, there's this one obvious thing, why can't all the other idiots see it? And so to frame it in terms of asking them to consider trade-offs, that'll make them look at it in a better way.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much for the speech. First, I'd like to say you had a very big impact in my thinking in the past, especially regarding environmental issues.
Oh, cool.
Very good videos, by the way. And what I would like to ask you today regarding the project, you mentioned about knowledge dissemination and the gap between the producers of knowledge and the receptors of knowledge and the consumers of knowledge.
Yeah.
And obviously, it is very important and it is very well known, however, that the knowledge production process is also very faulted, especially
Yes.
in academia with, research, distorted incentives and so on and so forth.
Yes.
I was wondering if you were willing to, if you have any initiatives for that area, for the knowledge production
Yeah.
process alongside the dissemination.
Definitely. Great question. So when I say knowledge producers and consumers, it's a shorthand because really the people I want to empower with better explanation are the superior knowledge producers, the people that I think are right. And the more we can figure out methods of explanation that privilege the people who are right and that expose the people who are wrong, the better. But I mentioned knowledge acquisition systems. The primary use case for that is knowledge consumers who want to be empowered, but the same basic systems that apply to knowledge consumers are incredibly useful to knowledge producers. And I'll give you the example in energy. I needed to develop systems for myself to, I use it, I think of seek, validate, and integrate knowledge. And at the beginning I was a knowledge consumer, but then later I was a knowledge producer, and I still needed to do those things, right? I needed good processes to seek knowledge, to validate it, and to integrate it. And so in that sense, everybody, like the things that we develop for knowledge consumers will be very helpful for people in the field. And at the same time, as knowledge consumers, if we have higher standards, that can be a huge incentive for knowledge producers, real or fake, to do a better job. So for example, if we just had the premise as knowledge consumers that we don't accept straw man arguments. So if you're going to engage somebody, you actually have to engage their argument. That would completely change, well, Twitter, right? I mean, everything, but certainly Twitter and how people conduct themselves. So there's so much, I haven't gotten into it too much today, but the podcast talks about this, and I think you'll see it more and more. There's so much leverage in just figuring out what different processes can we start using, what standards can we start promoting and raising that's going to up everyone's level. Because right now we're at an incredibly poor level because there are no standards. But it's not even, we have standards that people are violating, just nobody's talking about standards because in the explanation realm, people are just opportunistic trying to propagandize other people, or they have no idea what they're doing in terms of persuasion. And then on the consumption end, we're just looking for new claims. So I think it's going to be exciting to see, as we even just raise this as a topic of discussion, how that affects everyone. And what I expect is that I'll get more ideas from other people than I come up with myself.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So I am interested in helping spread objectivism, not just by listening or reading or watching the work of others and sharing, but also by helping to create some of that work.
Okay.
So how can I and folks like me help the Human Flourishing Project?
Great question. Well, the thing at the beginning will be engaging in the community. So right now there's a Facebook page, facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. And in each episode, I suggest an exercise at the end, and that's often the basis for discussion. So for example, in the second episode where we talked about knowledge acquisition systems, I asked people, hey, what are processes that you use that you feel like help you separate non-knowledge from knowledge? And at this stage, it's incredibly helpful just to have people entering that conversation and thinking about it. And then also, if you have any success or even experiments, just telling me about it. So it's just the kind of thing where I have a full-time business in energy right now. Over time, I want to be energy just to be one of the issues. But what I'm trying to do right now is just get people excited. So I'd say that if you can contribute to any of those discussions, or you can share with me what you're doing, then do that. And in general, just if any of this stuff inspires you and you feel like, oh, this gives me an idea, then just go act on the idea. I remember a line that Ayn Rand had, which I don't remember exactly, but it's in The Art of Nonfiction, which itself is edited, so I don't know exactly what she said. But she talks about, when people talk about spreading objectivism, and when I heard this line the first time, it didn't make much sense to me, or it seemed very tame to me, but she talked about the best thing you can do for objectivism is something to the effect of give a rational analysis of important issues. And even if you mention objectivism by name, that's not the biggest deal. And at the time, that just struck me as, well, that seems kind of weak. Like, can I do more? But now that now I just think of it totally differently, because I just think objectivism is that's just a tool for human flourishing. And I think of it more as objectivist philosophy. It's a set of ideas that I have the incredible benefit of being exposed to, and then I can use those. And then this is going to allow me to do a lot of cool things with my mind and my life that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And thus, in my different ventures, I have all these, in effect, intellectual technologies that I have access to that give me the ability to benefit and also a competitive advantage. But I think of it very much in terms of how can these amazing mental technologies help me and other people, not so much the proper name of the sum of the technologies that Ayn Rand came up with, not like how can I get people to accept that sum. Because when you talk about it just as a sum, it often ends up being if not a cult, it can be a club. Like, oh, well, I want you to join my club, and I want you to say that you agree with all these ideas too, and then but really it's about the ideas are just there to empower people, and if you think about how can I empower people using these kinds of philosophical technologies, I think it'll lead to much better results for you and for them.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the role of story in relationship to your knowledge acquisition system. Mm-hmm. Story is an important growing idea among business and personal development and the culture generally. Mm-hmm. And we're here largely because Rand wrote stories. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know, is story development part of your thinking? Is it seen by you as how does it relate to knowledge, the type of knowledge, or is it something you do or would consider adding to the program of your knowledge acquisition systems? I think every one of your customers will be interested also in story development.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the fundamental is that there's just incredible value in using stories the right way. For acquisition, I think of it, in my experience, explanation as well. And I really started thinking about this early in Center for Industrial Progress, and it's the kind of thing, as you even raise it, I think, oh, that reminds me to do more of it. But think about how human beings grasp complex, integrated causal relationships. So stories are this amazing way by which societies and individuals and authors capture lots of complex interactions in ways that are otherwise hard to capture. I think that's part of what you get from something like Atlas Shrugged, is just the causation and the intricacy of it that can be captured in a story just has this amazing quality to it. And it's not something, there's a lot more for me to even think about with it, but I would just affirm the general idea that in terms of knowledge systems, stories have an enormously powerful role to play. And it's worth us thinking about how to use them effectively, but also how to use them objectively, because they're certainly often used non-objectively. But 100% the potential is crucial.
So there's one, I think, somewhat positive cultural development right now, which ironically is called the intellectual dark web. So there are figures who are concerned with having actual discussion, and they're having a lot of success, so it's kind of a positive thing. People like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and some of these podcasters. So how do you see that in relation to your project about standards and knowledge systems, so forth? Is any relation there, or?
So the intellectual dark webs, I know I have different relationships or non-relationships with different ones of those guys. I mean, here's the thing that I have to admit, which may be interesting in itself, is that I don't follow those guys too much myself. I'm a weirdly opportunistic learner, perhaps to a fault. So I just have I'm very bad at just being generally informed about things or following things unless I see just a really crucial need for me. So if you saw how much or how little I read the news, you'd probably be shocked at it. But it's like, well, what am I going to do with it? Like, as soon as I need to know something, then I'm a maniac, and then I will learn it. So right now, for instance, there's this really interesting set of resources on consulting businesses that I'm consuming because I run a consulting business, and I found some good new stuff. And I was in, dozens of hours of that in the past, and thinking about it and integrating it. But then there's all sorts. But I haven't consumed any Sam Harris for a year, and But I think there's a positive force. But to me, at least somewhat a positive force. But I haven't found it incredibly useful. And in part, for those conversations to be really useful, they should lead to knowledge that I can use. And better ways of thinking in pretty quick order. And one thing that I find with some of these discussions is people are satisfied that they're having discussions, and I guess that's okay, but it doesn't seem to be going toward a lot of knowledge. And then when they engage with what I would regard as much better philosophical ideas than some of them have, I'm not impressed with the way that they're engaging with those ideas. So I'm happy to engage with them. I'm not I'm not like a big fan as a consumer, just because it's not this, like the stuff that I like, that I consume, and I'll talk about this on the podcast more, how to do it, but I try to find the person in a field that I think has real knowledge, and then I have a bunch of different processes for finding the best people, and then I just take in everything I possibly can and try to reap all the benefits. So with these guys, I'm interested in engaging with them. And I can't say too much about, the one thing I'll also say that I think they're very good at, particularly Jordan Peterson, is Jordan Peterson, and there's a lesson for people in objectivist philosophy with him for sure, is Jordan Peterson engages with people's lives as they experience them. So he's talking about philosophical ideas, but he's very much speaking to life as it's experienced. So he'll talk to a young woman who feels maybe that it's not okay for her to want to have kids, and he'll address that, or a young man who kind of feels like he's a loser and doesn't know how to be a man. He's talking about ideas, important abstractions, but there's an expression in copywriting that you want to enter the conversation that people are already having in their own minds, and I think he is very, very good at doing that. So in terms of having the best answers, often not, I think, but yeah, so I want to engage with them, and then also I want to learn from what they're doing well, but I don't see it as, intellectual dark web, that's what I want to do. I think of it as real knowledge, that's what I want to
do. You started your talk talking about nutrition and your lifelong, is it a struggle? Maybe you can call it finding the right way of eating, and you came to a certain way recently.
Yeah.
Maybe, are you willing to, number one, talk about what that way of eating is, and number two, what kind of phases did you go through, or different ways of eating, and why did you determine at that time this is not really working? Was it your experience of it, and Was it your weight went up or down, or
Yeah.
what was happening with you that?
So I'm not going to tell, if I told you how I eat, that's the only thing you would ever want to ask me about. I'll tell it at some point, but part of it is I do not want to be on the premise of, I have a microphone, so I want you to listen. Like, I'm trying to become an expert at systems, and at a certain point, I would like to publicly see if I can, either I want to figure out that I'm wrong, or I want to figure out that I'm right, but I want that to be objective information to other people. Now, if somebody's my friend, yeah, they'll see me eat. If they see me eat at my home, they'll
Well,
see. But I'll tell you about how I think about it, which I think
Okay,
is
that's
useful.
fine. Maybe we can talk in private about how you eat, because the reason I bring it up is it's a very important topic that I found myself 9 years ago, changing how I ate dramatically, and experiencing 9 years worth of information and how that changed.
Well, yeah,
my
let's
life.
talk about it individually.
So yeah,
Just don't record it.
I'd be interesting in just knowing the process.
Yeah, let me tell you the process.
I know what I
just-
went through.
Okay, I just want to rush it because I just want to get one more question if there is one. But yeah, so here's how I think about it, and this has really changed in last year, and this has helped me vet things, which is that I think about, as a principle, I talk about this in episode 2, I believe. Yeah, what does it mean? What are my standards of flourishing in X area, including nutrition? So what does it mean to flourish in nutrition? And it's usually just equated with fat loss, which is like a huge problem, that's the thing it's equated with. But so I could say, okay, fat loss is one, but also energy levels, and also a bunch of things that I cannot consider myself flourishing if I'm experiencing. So for example, if I'm experiencing continuous decision fatigue about my food, that's miserable. And I've experienced that a lot. I don't want that. And then I have like a list of 5 or 6 that I gave, but that decision fatigue, people experience guilt. Like, I want to actually be, and longevity for sure. Like, I want to be eating in a way that, and there's taste, but that the overall experience of food in my life is a positive experience, that I'm not mentally, it's not hurting my mind, but I'm not just struggling over it. And once I started thinking about that, then I realized, most people aren't even talking about human flourishing and nutrition, so I'm not going to pay too much attention. And then look at the people who are actually claiming that they're getting all of those results, mental and physical, and then that was very helpful.
List 7 words that they associate with flourishing.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting parallel after that in episode 2 where you said that you track these things, and one of my heroes is Benjamin Franklin, and came up with this system for tracking his virtues, and it's very similar. I was wondering, you talk about those as the experience, I think, of the process of living.
Yeah.
I don't think that's exactly what you said, but what would you call those? Are those emotional states? And if they are, do you have you ever done the same thing on the level of virtues?
So first of all, thank you for being an avid listener of the new show. So I hope other people check it out at humanflourishingproject.com or on Facebook. And it's now on iTunes, finally. So all of you who have told me I can't listen to anything not on iTunes, that excuse is gone. So So the question was, I just wanted people to think about what they mean by flourishing, and so I suggest use 7 words that capture it. And then when I cheated and got 8, because I couldn't narrow it down to 7 myself. But
9.
Well, then I added 1 at the end, but it was really 9. So I had a bunch, you can listen to it, but it was like I use altitude a lot as a concept, and you can listen to the specific ones, but I mentioned that I like to think of it as, what are the words that capture to me what it's like to experience flourishing? Because flourishing is a process of interrelated actions, but also that go along with interrelated experiences. So I wanted to be able to, experience is an easy thing to track in certain ways. And it's an honest thing to track. Sometimes if we say virtues, there are ways of tracking that, but it's almost like a bottom line. So if I tracked these 7 or 8, I guess 8 or 9 things every day, what would I find? And I mentioned that I have a spreadsheet where I just track these things, and then sometimes I track things that are connected to them. Like I'll track mental continuity, which means how little I'm interrupted in terms of my mind, because that incredibly correlates with both serenity and altitude, which are 2 of my 8. So I think the interesting thing was, think about your bottom line experience, that one thing to track, and then think of things that are correlated with that. And then virtues sound intriguing, and just send me something to read on it. But no, I have not thought about that, but in general, I think we tend to under-track mental things that don't have exact measurements, and that you can achieve a stunning degree of process just by trying to put a 1 to 10 number, or sometimes if it's in a different, if I talk about persuasion, a -5 to 5 number, because in persuasion you can make things worse. But if you just start putting numbers on key concepts, it leads to really, really interesting things, and it makes you honestly capture a reality that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. All right, we're out of time. He said the end. Thank you very much.